Good morning, Vikings fans. This is Morning Joe's. Back finally after a little sabbatical that we had during the hiatus. I tried to sound fancy, like I was off doing pro bono work somewhere, but I was mainly sleeping. But yeah, we are back. Training camp's here. It's an exciting time of year. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and Purple Territory Radio, here with Mr. Joe Oberly, who is the editor of the Purple Territory Media Network. How you doing, man? I feel like we haven't talked in a long time.
Not bad. You cut the theme song off too early when she said, "What do you know, Joe? I don't know nothing," because that's me. My brain's been in hiatus.
Yeah, it's Well, first I'll mention that we are brought to you by Ticket Club. I don't think we talked about this on the show because we were on our hiatus, but through the end of the day tomorrow, so through the end of the month, they're offering through our site a free year annual, premium membership on their website. Basically means you get access to tickets with zero fees for an entire year for the Vikings, Twins, Wild, Wolves. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we're actually going to have another partnership starting next week. I think people are really going to like, because it's basically like exclusive Vikings memorabilia, but that's for next week. Yeah, another quick announcement too, just so people know kind of how things are. We typically, last year for example, we had 3 press passes per day that we rotated through the team for training camp. And this year the Vikings, and as far as I've heard, the NFL as a whole has kind of had to pump the brakes on non-traditional media getting access to the team, just because there's so many people going on WordPress and creating websites, and they wanted to make sure that they were doing it in a fair way, which makes sense to me. And while clearly we would love to be there, it's for, in the long run, it's what's best for the team, and probably what's best for us as well. And so I have no doubt that we'll be back next year, but I wanted people to know that we aren't there, at least on the sidelines. We're having people go just like through the ticket process, but nothing on the sidelines. Anyway, that's kind of a downer.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean we won't cover the team just as thoroughly as we have in the past. I mean, we aren't going to have, like you said, sideline passes to camp and stuff like that, but we're going to be, monitoring the team and scouting around for news and reporting that and writing our analysis.
Yeah.
Opinion stories, just as we did in the past, and we'll hope for the future that things change and things ease up a lot out there. We have a good relationship with the Vikings at the website, and I think that will be put us in good stead, and we'll be back on the sidelines down the road. Hopefully.
Definitely. I feel like we've been killing it in regards to camp coverage. Bleacher Report's been picking up like every article we've written, so that's a good sign. It's also a bit of a relief for me because I've never said this on the show, but I'm terrified of Zimmer. And I was building up my confidence all summer to actually look him in the eye and ask him a question. And I don't have to do that now. So I actually should announce that they did offer us press passes, but I turned them down just out of fear. I'm kidding. But there was a few things that happened recently that were a little bit outside of camp, but were newsworthy. Actually, just one thing that I wanted to talk about and get your thoughts on, Joe. Because I did talk about them I appear on KLGR Radio out of Redwood Falls, a show called The Scoop, once a week, and we talked about this relatively in depth the last 2 weeks, because unfortunately there's been 2 situations with the Vikings, one that both actually involve Holton Hill in some way. The Rock Thomas situation, which we don't really need to talk about because that was 2 weeks ago, and he ended up being cut, but Holton Hill being suspended for an additional 4 games on top of the original 4-game suspension that he had, meaning that he'll be out for 8 games, which is really bad timing for him and for the team, just with Mike Hughes from what I've heard, looking near top speed, I think was Sean Borman's quote, but he still hasn't like practiced with pads on. And just in terms of Holton Hill's relationship with the team, there's kind of a dividing line of our writers in terms of who thinks that he'll still make the roster and who doesn't. I don't know. I think, Joe, you have a better feel on some of this stuff with having worked with the team closely in the recently and knowing Zimmer's patience for this sort of thing. I know, like with Childress, they brought him in to kind of clean stuff up, but I'm not sure if maybe the team feels like they can't trust Holton Hill anymore, or if they just don't have patience for that sort of thing. But first, I didn't really hear why he was suspended a second time. Like, did he test positive? I could never track that down.
There's speculation out there. Let me say first that sabbatical and hiatus are better words than suspension for us. We are our broadcast may have been suspended, but we are not suspended. That aside, there was speculation that it was a non-PED thing, just a substance abuse deal with maybe, and it's all speculation, so I don't want to go any further than that. Because until you know what it is, it's not fair to Holton Hill or anybody else who likes to say what you think it is. But yeah, it's really not been out there that I've been able to find. But it's a tough blow, and I immediately thought right out of the gate after hearing it that it would be the same path as Rock Thomas. They get rid of him.
Yeah.
We don't get this headache, but you know what? They haven't yet. He's practicing, which he can practice with the team. It says a couple things. Zimmer, has faith in him as a talent. They went out and got him despite the rumor or the situations that he had in college.
Yep.
So I think they like him, and with the rookie coming back, he was coming back slowly. They're all
Hughes.
Yeah, Hughes. They're all of a sudden a little bit
Thin.
At cornerback. So I think they need him, and the fact that he's not gone already tells you that they are planning to keep him, and unless they bring in somebody to replace him. And there's a lot of speculation out there right now that the Vikings are going to be looking for it. They were asking Zimmer that the other day. He says that's Rick Spielman's job, and when you hear that kind of thing, maybe they are looking, rather than him just full off.
There was a veteran corner that there was rumors the Vikings were talking to, and I forget who it was. But he was, I think, like 31 or 32. My feeling on it was a wait and see thing. Like from what I've derived from camp thus far, Hughes didn't practice like the first 2 or 3 days, but now he, like, starting as of yesterday, he has been practicing. So that feels to me like maybe that was his punishment, and now they're just going. I mean, they got him even.
Hughes?
Oh, sorry, Hill. Yeah. No, Hughes hasn't been practicing, but Hill was held out for the first couple days, and then he's back. They have him as part of the mix and match of people they want returning kicks, which is basically everybody on the team at this point. So I think that's a good sign for him as well.
They're going to solidify that position, whoever that kicker is, before Hill can get back on the field. And I wouldn't think
Definitely.
he could be a backup or something.
But I was surprised they even had him doing that, considering that. I'm sure that they want to. I don't know. It's just they're.
You think you were going to sign that he has another thing for that position. That means that they're not going to get rid of him. They're still coming down the road. I think it's a good sign for him in that regard. When he's clean up his act.
Yep. And he was with Rock Thomas when Rock Thomas got arrested, so that might be the reason, too.
Yeah, it's not good. I mean, he's probably on strike too, for as far as
Yeah.
Over time, and he's done. But just like a guy that gets hurt often, you feel like, well, you can't count on him. Well, you can't count on a guy that isn't allowed by the league to put on a uniform.
Yeah, it's really too bad. I mean, I really like him. I think he's clearly lived up to some of the expectation. I mean, he was like undrafted, but he was at least a second round talent, and he's got the body type I think Zimmer likes. Like that. I mean, Rhodes was here before that, but Trey Waynes is another guy that's similar in size and ability. So hopefully they'll be able to hold down the fort at the cornerback position. You know, you always have yeah, you have Curse if you need him. Even though he's more of a slot guy. Craig James was good last year, and that's not a guy that a lot of people talk about. Actually, there's been a lot of really great. If people want to look into bubble guys before they go to camp, if they have tickets or if they're just following along, there's been a lot of our guys have been covering those guys on both Vikings territory and Purple PTSD. In depth each bubble guy, so that's been kind of interesting. But I alluded to the competition for punt returns. There's also a relatively big competition for the holder for field goals, which I found interesting. Since I alluded to the punt return first, we can get into that, and I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that. Basically, there's been 10 to 15 guys they've been going through. I omitted some just because they're not that well known, and they might probably won't end up getting the gig. But Amir Abdullah, Jordan Taylor, Chad Beebe, who is having an amazing camp to beyond his amazing offseason, Thielen, Diggs, Holton Hill, B.C. Johnson, Dylan Mitchell, and surprisingly C.J. Ham. He seems like the last guy you would have returning punts.
I was older in high school. I can't believe I haven't gotten this call yet.
Yeah. And on the holding side, you have they were having this was reported, but Dan Bailey was reportedly struggling. He did hit 5 of 6 kicks on Sunday, but Marwan Malouf came out and said that it was a holding issue, which there were a couple field goals off the top of my head I can remember from last season that went awry, and that was a holding issue as well. And it came down to, at the time, Prefer, I think he said facetiously, but there was some truth in that, and there's always truth in jest, but that he had never learned how to hold, and that was kind of something that I found to be astounding at the time. And granted, he was kind of joking, but I also think that that's the truth, that he just wasn't really taught how to hold correctly, and they brought him in anyway. But some of the guys that are competing for the hold are BB again, Kyle Rudolph, and then Slaughter, Browning, Mannion, and Thielen. So in regards to returning punts, I think that is quietly one of the bigger battles, just in regards to how important Sherrills was to this team and the way that this team plays, you know, with field position and not turning the ball over. I mean, he always was in the top 3 for average yards. He never seemed to really turn the ball over, and he always picked up 5-10 yards or turned nothing into something. And it's really disappointing that they were unable to re-sign him, especially considering where he ended up going in New Orleans.
You moved on to punt return here quick. Let me get a chance to comment on the holder. I don't think that's something that will linger long. They're probably looking at people. They're probably sending things to Wild to get his stuff together and really focus on this. And then they'll decide, and they'll go forward with it by the time the preseason games are starting.
Do you?
I think that's something they're gonna deal with them because they want to get these guys together.
Yeah.
And holding and snapping and have them build chemistry. They obviously get the opportunity to do that all throughout camp together, all throughout preseason games. They always work together all season long. But you want to get that going into the offense. They can't be like, especially if he's having trouble. Get him a holder that he can trust. Get him a holder that he knows what is going to be done. And so I don't know if some of this is just read to the media or what it is, because to have all those guys trying out holding at training camp
Doesn't it? Don't you feel a little bit that Wild should have had this nailed down by now? Doesn't I mean it concerns me a little bit. And then there was the story from last week. I wrote an article about in regards to the new long snapper, like not McDermott but Cole Austin Cutting. There you go. And his situation with the Navy and having his commitments there. And the new rule being something that Trump changed, that players can enter the draft without fulfilling their military commitments. Usually they had to take like 2 years off to do that. I wonder if they... I have to think. I mean, from what I read and then reported on Vikings territory, it sounded like lawyers from the Pentagon were meeting with the Vikings to figure out how to make this work, and I'm assuming a lot of this stuff will happen in the off season for him. Otherwise, you'd end up keeping 2 long snappers, and nobody keeps 2 long snappers. But they he was the only long snapper drafted, so that must mean that the Vikings really think highly of him, and maybe they would have drafted him higher if not for these commitments. But that's just another wrinkle in this where you have to think that if he has to take any time off, that might also disrupt the 3-person team that is the snapper, holder, and kicker. And it's just, I was so excited about Malouf, as an assistant special teams coach. The last 2 seasons in Miami, he had a rookie 2 seasons ago who hit 90% of his kicks, field goals. And then last year they had a veteran who had a 91% hit rate. So I was hoping that maybe the monkey on Zimmer's back that has been the kicking position really since he started coaching here would be fixed. And that's not to say that it isn't. It's just that some of these things concern me a little bit. That's clearly a work in progress anyway.
You have to look at these things. I mean, they should have, you can certainly say, didn't they learn their lesson last year where you get a rookie kicker and having it with the Green Bay Packers game to a certain degree. It looks like it's possible that the long snapper can come down to money. Kevin McDermott's making a heck of a lot more money than Cutting will, and so it may be McDermott that's on the cutting room floor.
Ooh, I like that one.
Like I said earlier, they got to get it figured out quickly and make a decision and move on and start getting these people working together. I don't know if it's just a way to take people that or players that were maybe not complacent because there's no competition for them to shake them up and let them know, hey, we're looking at this. You better be on your P's and Q's and get it all squared away because these are one particular game to do well. So it seems like it's something that happens every year. And what it's an important position. They have to have competent players in these positions.
Definitely.
And like you said, it's been a Achilles heel for Zimmer since he's been here. So hopefully they'll get it figured out soon. But I like the idea of at least pressing these guys with pressure. They're going to have pressure on the game. They're going to make the team.
Definitely. And from the punt return situation, do you really think there's any sort of possibility for a guy like Thielen or Diggs to end up getting the position just because of how important they are to the offense and maybe them getting winded a little bit? Then you have Thielen. I remember him fumbling that punt against the Cowboys a couple seasons ago in a game that they could have won. I just can't. I mean, I'm not really worried about Thielen fumbling, but I can't see them doing that and then also running back out on the field with the offense and getting all those hits. Yeah.
I don't think so, Joe. I think they'll put someone back there that like a Chad Beebe, who I think we'll talk about this later. Is definitely I think he's gonna win the third wide receiver position or be very much in the mix.
Me too.
I think someone like that they'll get that job or some other speedster that they know has good hands and Beebe does. I don't think you put your top line guys like Thielen and Diggs out there only A as in a dire need or B when you got some trips plays on the
Yeah.
Randy Moss.
Yep. That Kansas City punt return he had is one of my favorite Vikings moments.
So I don't think so. I think those guys that's
Yeah.
don't have to use them on your spot.
That's a big Kubiak thing. I'm a little bit different. I'm kind of cheating there, but he loves guys that can do more than one thing. I think Abdullah is interesting at that position, but I am getting, they did re-sign him. It wasn't obviously a huge contract, but I'm getting the feeling that they aren't going to end up keeping him, just in terms of all the roster spots that they need for other positions. Then there was the rumor recently that the team was looking at Theo Riddick, who was cut by the Lions so they could bring in Mike Daniels, who was released by the Packers. So it was really surprising that Mike Daniels got released. I think maybe if the Vikings had some cap room, they would have brought him in. And then it was also not as surprising, but pretty surprising, at least in the Detroit media, that Theo Riddick got let go. He's like a better version of Abdullah, I guess, in the pros. Last year, I looked up his stats before the show. He had 40 rushes for 171 yards, which is a 4.3 average. But he had 61 receptions for 384 yards, which is a 6.3 average. So as a guy that you might only want to end up giving the ball 5 times a game, he seems like the Swiss Army knife maybe that Abdullah could be, but Abdullah also has a history of not being able to handle the physicality of the NFL, and Riddick does. So they clearly like what Detroit does in that regard. I think they're looking to replicate it. It looks like Riddick visited with both the Saints and the Broncos. So there's been no visits here as far as I've heard. I don't think they'll end up getting him, but I think it is a little telling for what they're looking to do.
Yeah, they like his pass catching ability there. The Vikings do a lot more play action here and get back out the backfield and maybe throw him the ball. Riddick can catch the ball real well, but there's no room for him. I don't even know if Amir Abdullah would make the team, but to have potentially 2 former Lions running backs.
Yeah.
I scratch my head at that one. So I think it's a non-starter. One good thing is they didn't get Daniels, because then we don't have to hear the Packers fans yell. The Vikings can't do anything without someone from Green Bay on their team.
Yeah, I mean, there was a really, in the aughts, a run of Ryan Longwell, Darren Sharper, Favre, obviously, I don't know what else to call it. The zeros. I think that would explain my odds, calling it the zeros. But I think the other actually the most interesting position battle to me is pretty obvious if anyone's listened to the show, or obvious to Joe, in that it's the wide receiver 3 position. You alluded to BB a little bit ago. One thing that I think to start out the wide receiver discussion that I found interesting, it was Zimmer is so he's so, he plays things so close to the chest or the vest most of the time, but every once in a while he'll just throw heavy amounts of shade at a player or players, and that was the case over the weekend. I think the quote was that if these young guys don't know where to line up, if they don't know what routes to run, we will look to replace them with someone else. We're actively looking for other people all the time. That was a paraphrase, but you get the crux of the argument. And so that sounds like, to me, he's really not happy with some of the younger guys, Dylan Mitchell, BC Johnson. I know that Mitchell had a few drops to start camp, but that he kind of bounced back in day 3. But that is really not a good sign for those guys. And in terms of position, or like we've been talking about, the roster spots being at a premium, are they going to keep 6 receivers or 5? And then what does that mean for the cornerback position? Luckily, Holton Hill won't count against the roster when he's suspended. So that's also kind of a benefit, or a reason why he might stick around. But yeah, that sounds like, they need to step it up and step it up quick.
That would get my attention if I was one of those guys that, it sounds, we're wondering what prompted that. Obviously, it's frustration, but maybe it's, they're not listening in camp. Maybe you have one mistake
Yeah.
I don't blame him. I don't blame
No.
him for saying it. I don't like the fact that he hasn't seen anything about a player outside of the box.
It really is, and I also think that, to me, I respect Zimmer enough and or fear him to think that this is, he's a logical person, so he's probably talked to them about this privately, and he's using this. I mean, like you said, this will get a player's attention, seeing it written about. I mean, from not to go into it too much, but from talking to Greenway on the show the few times he's been on, and talking to the Vikings about press passes, I was surprised by the amount of reading people in the organization and players do of our stuff or stuff in general. I always thought they didn't pay attention to that kind of stuff, but I mean, Greenway, off the top of his head, mentioned that somebody on Purple PTSD didn't like him for a long time, and that was Luke Braun. Like he was aware of Luke's deep-seated loathing of him the last 1 or 2 years he was here, and said that he likes the site now that Luke isn't writing about him. So I do think that they understand, or Zimmer understands, the power of that, and he wouldn't do that, especially considering what happened with Rhett Ellison and the meetings he had with Greenway about being, a better player's coach. And I think he knows that, and he only uses it when he feels like he needs to. And maybe these guys just weren't doing what he expected, which is surprising considering OTAs and mini camps, and you think that. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't have it, so he clearly knows the patience, and for him to do that, and like I said, we'll have to watch how they respond.
Yeah, and it sounds like, so I wrote an article yesterday, or posted it yesterday anyway, about what we could derive in regards to the wide receiver 3 position from the first couple days of camp. I used a depth chart graph or image from an article from Daily Norseman that showed mainly that Beebe and Taylor were getting a lot of work with the ones. It sounds like Treadwell worked with the ones for the first time yesterday, which is another big sign. My article was mainly about my love for Jeff Badet and the fact that he's been out with a groin. He's had a groin injury, so he hasn't participated. Yeah, I've also heard that. I was like, oh, edit button. No, it sounds like, though, I've heard a lot of great things about Beebe. He reportedly had a down day yesterday, but everyone's been saying that he's basically like solidifying his spot at the third receiver position. Taylor reportedly has been struggling to gain separation from DBs. So there's also been some talk of the defense really outplaying the offense at this point, but that's to be expected with the offense learning the new wrinkles of the Kubiak system. But if they were to keep five receivers, then you'd have maybe Jordan Taylor for red zone stuff, just based on his size and his dexterity, and then BB is more of a all-around type of guy, like a poor man's Diggs almost. He's more of a possession guy. The argument this offseason being, do they go with speed, size, or possession skills? And it sounds like right now they have size and possession skills, and then my hope was that Badet could come in and just be a burner every once in a while, almost like what was his name last year that caught all those touchdowns, like 5 touchdowns on 17 catches. Yeah, like a version of him, because he's also not very big. But it sounds like that is what is going on, especially since they hadn't had Treadwell with the ones up until yesterday. So maybe they are going to eat that cap space and move on from Treadwell. I most definitely would, but I've never been a big fan of Treadwell. I just can't see giving a roster spot to him when you have these other guys that could make lots of rosters around the NFL. Money is, I said this in my article, but money is temporary. Roster spots are forever, and they could end up going to a team that the Vikings have to play in the playoffs or whatever. But what are your thoughts on the third receiver spot? The lack of Treadwell getting any time with the ones up until yesterday. BB's amazing offseason.
Back when I had a pass, to go to practice, OTAs, and minicamp, I was raving about BB back then.
Yeah.
I thought, he looked sharp and just so quick. Granted, inside without pads, and you're on offense, you don't know what the defense is doing, no one's coming to react. But boy, he looked so good. I mean, like he wasn't strong, like quicker, he was definitely power and that year. So they kept him around last year, and they got not only kept him around last year when he was on the field and wasn't injured. So that bodes well for him, and he's just capitalizing and building on it. So I think he's going to be either sharing it or the third receiver guy is going to be spot is going to be his, because he doesn't have the size, but
Yeah.
he needs quickness, and he's a good route runner, which they love, and certainly Cousins likes that kind of thing out of a receiver. So
Thielen said he was the best route runner he'd ever seen in his entire life.
well, there is that. Some guys who are very good at it.
Yeah.
I don't think that Brandon Zylstra coming back that's hurting him. He's already behind, and he's
Yep.
behind the eight ball to begin with. It's a good special teams player that could help him hang around, but I don't know about that. I know they brought in Taylor because what's his name, Kubiak brought him. I'm familiar with him, and so they like him for a reason. But even at OTAs and minicamp, I thought he was kind of thought he was slow and very quick. When you're looking at Badette and BB out there, but of course anybody is. So maybe they hang on to him for what reasons that you said. As someone that can make those catches in the red zone. I have felt for quite some time now that Treadwell takes their numbers, and I should have looked up beforehand what that will cost them to take.
$3.5 million.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Especially on the cap.
Yeah.
By the same token, what are you going to do if he's not, you can either cut him and put somebody else on your roster and eat that money, or else keep him on the team and have him sit on the sideline.
Yep.
Same thing, and then you lose the roster.
Great point.
I think
It's the same difference. It is. You get the same output from it. Ooh, I'm stealing that. Yep.
I really think that Mabel ends up doing that, and I wish I was out there to see how he looks this year. I didn't think he looked great throughout the entire OTAs and minicamp. He had a couple good days here and there, but generally he had some not so good days, trouble catching the ball. So I think that's the way they'll move it. It's still going to be a great competition, but Jeff Badette is very good. Unfortunate, or he was. He's got to get back on the field and prove that he can do it. But
Definitely.
Still a great battle to watch for us, man.
The tight end position has been fun too. It sounds like, one thing I'm looking at what Kubiak has done in some of the seasons where he had that with the Ravens, especially between 2014 and 2015. Same personnel, but they went from like 30th in total offense to 12th and 31st in rushing to 8th. And one of the more surprising things was that he would often look at a tight end that was a better blocker than a better pass catcher. And so when you look at the rub against Kyle Rudolph is exactly that. And so you look at guys like Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin who are better at that, or even a David Morgan. And it sounds like, I haven't heard a lot about Rudolph, but there was a great clip on Sean Borman's Twitter of Cousins working really closely with Irv Smith Jr. Like the entire field was empty but them two, and Cousins was really animated with his hand Like, he was doing a lot of hand signaling and explaining the routes to Irv Smith Jr., like just them two, and then throwing passes and hooking up with him, which shows really how I think integral he's going to be this season in Irv Smith Jr. But reportedly, Tyler Conklin also worked with the first team on Sunday, and a guy who I hadn't even heard of up until recently, Cole Hikutini, has, I guess, had a really good camp, like multiple acrobatic catches, one-hand catches, that sort of thing. So they're suddenly relatively, seemingly stacked at the tight end position. That's what Kubiak is known for, is the two tight end sets. I'm personally just really excited to see them actually run some of those this season. I think that's going to be, I've said this a few times, but if we look back on this season, if there's like some major success in terms of winning a championship, I think Kubiak is going to be the guy that we look at in terms of what got them over the hump, I guess. And it does sound like the offense has been a little behind the defense, like I said, but that's really to be expected. They have a lot of new linemen. They have the new plays that they're running. There's got to be some growing pains in terms of figuring out, like with Stefanski and Kubiak and Dennison, all of it. But it sounds like they're figuring it out for the most part outside of those rookie guys. So it's exciting. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm done. Yeah. Well, he had that knee surgery like a few weeks ago. Ooh.
I want to say like 12 to 15 pounds. They say he looks good moving out there, is what I've heard, and that's good. You have to follow the money. I think he's going to be. They signed him to the contract. They kept him around, so I think he's going to be a huge deal this year. And I know after this, I don't think much of his contract is guaranteed, but
no.
They're certainly going to count on him for this year, and usually it'll be him and Smith and Conklin, some of these other guys until Morgan can get back. Morgan is vital for such a great block.
Yeah. Yeah, they put him on the PUP list 3 days ago.
So he's going to got to get back out here and get back on the field. So, it'll figure in his injury if he doesn't, when he's coming back with a knee like that, mid-camp, it's never good. You
Yep.
have that healed and ready to go before camp.
Yeah, and I think that was, I seem to recall that being the case. Like, I thought they said that he'd be ready for the start of camp. Same thing with Hughes, and granted, Hughes is very, very, I mean, he's again, near full speed, and he's been cutting and running backwards and all of that. So I think he'll be fine in terms of the season, but yeah, it's, yeah. What week did he go down? I seem to okay. Yeah, I seem to remember 6, either week 6 or having had played 6 games. Definitely. I mean, it seems like they've been a little lucky in terms of injuries thus far. Or not lucky, but at least they haven't caught the injury bug. But yeah, Morgan is on the PUP. Linville Joseph is still recovering from a surgery or multiple surgeries. That gives some opportunity from some of the guys that you were gonna want to see anyway. Yeah, it's I believe that is that it just seems to be happening at positions of need, which I guess is any position where you have an injury like that. I really liked Bauer. I kind of looked at him as like a poor man's Hunter. Same school, same or similar physical attributes. No one's the same as Hunter, but you feel like one of the coaches said this in an interview that I read in a press release recently that they're like, God willing, they won't have an injury to like the D line or the offensive line, because especially it seems like they're a little thin on the D line at the tackle spot. There's been some good things. They've had Mata Afa playing with the first teams because Jalen Holmes was out up until yesterday as well. I don't know where Shamar Stephen is or what he's doing. Jaleel Johnson was another guy that was a surprise cut candidate for a lot of the articles written this offseason. And he seems to have stepped up yesterday as well. He had a great practice. But everyone's pointing to Mata Afa, who played the position in college, and he actually was like one of two guys in the NCAA that had above an 80 grade on Pro Football Focus it was above an 85 grade for both his pass rushing and run stopping ability, but he just was undersized, so the team tried to move him to linebacker, and it seems like they clearly are moving him back to his natural position. He's a little bit too small, which by these standards means he's still like a huge human being. I know Ian Paraguay, one of our writers and a podcast host, is enamored with Mata Afa, so I get excited just in like looking at what he did in college. But like Amir Abdullah is a very good example of that. He had one of the best college careers of any running back ever, and he just was undersized and it didn't work for him. So we'll see, but with a line that, obviously Zimmer likes to rotate guys in and out, any lack of depth is concerning, especially with Everson Griffin's if he doesn't bounce back the way that I'm hoping he will.
I think he will. I think they got to get Linville back. That's the biggest thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
And that pun is intended as well. I think he had 2 options for surgeries. I don't think they were major, but they're surgeries, so they are major
yep.
in some regard. So they're going to bring him back.
Especially for a big guy.
Yeah, he doesn't need a lot of reps in Mike Zimmer's defense because he knows it. So you can plug him back in once he's ready to go. But man, they got to have him back, and they're a little beat up on the defensive line right now. It's certainly concerning. There's a lot of question marks, but the only one that isn't a question mark is Neil Hunter. So hopefully
yeah.
Keeps things. I think Everson will bounce back. He's the kind of guy that is a worker, and he lost last season because of the issues that he had, and I hope he's got those figured out. But physically and with his ability to do things, I think he will return and be more pumped up than ever.
He was one of the few Vikings that Madden gave over a 91 grade to. I think it was him, Thielen, Diggs, and Xavier Rhodes, which is a questionable at this point. Speaking of staying healthy, I mean, that's what concerns me about Holton Hill, not to get back into that, but with Rhodes seemingly becoming the Dalvin Cook of the defense, you got to wonder about that. Speaking of Dalvin Cook, though, I wanted to just touch on a couple more things. Bradbury's looked good. I think the offensive line has looked really good. There's been some clips of Alexander Mattison breaking off these huge runs. But it's due to, the holes that they've been opening for him are huge, but it's really great to see his ability to run. I think the way it was described was confidently, and his cuts were like amazing in Madison. Who was Danny Isadora actually got credited for the 2 like 70-yard runs that Madison had, in that he opened the holes, which is a really good sign. But outside of that, even though he's not a rookie, because I put this under, I wanted to talk about the rookies a little bit. Brian O'Neill came into camp in tremendous shape, was the way I read it. And Stefanski was just talking about how amazing he looks compared to even last year, which I don't think he'll have any trouble with the sophomore slump just because I think he's going to have a lot more help next to him in either. The inside joke of that is if having either Klein or Samia next to him is such an upgrade over what Remmers was doing. So I can't imagine that now knowing that he's like dropped some weight but looks in great shape, even though that reminds me a little bit of Khalil and scares me a little bit. The line sounds to be looking really strong, Bradbury included, and I know you got a chance to see a little bit of that. Granted, they weren't in pads, and I think you mentioned that they just weren't getting false starts, which is a positive considering how young and new everything is.
Yeah, I'm right now bullish on the offensive line. I like to say it better not get much worse than it was last year. So we can all be excited. It's all optimistic in the camp. You think they'll got to be together, stay healthy, and work together well. And I am hopeful for that. I think everything you hear him talk about Bradbury is that he's smart, he's a hard worker, and he's got a little nasty to him, which I think Zimmer likes.
Yep.
All of those things. And
Sparano definitely did.
Yeah, line next door to left guard, and more a natural position for him. So he's gonna be filling there nice and be a good tutor for Bradbury. I was reading some quotes from Bradbury before the show, and he was saying, I just got to make sure I get my calls right, be confident in them, and what I'm seeing. Because if I don't get them right, I'm going to rip everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge adjustment for any center coming into the league.
I did read too, just in that really quickly in that regard, that what is great and what seems to be happening too is that Elfline's there so he can help him, and Elfline said it was similar to Berger being there for him when he started. Yes.
So yeah, I think that will be good for them, and hopefully Reef has a bounce back year after having a down year last year. And I've always been a big Brian O'Neill fan. First time I saw him being at camp last year, so I think he had a very good season. And I think he's gonna, like you say, hopefully he won't be have a sophomore slump when he comes in ready to go like you described. And I think that's all good.
He gave up a sack though. One sack. That's you can't have that.
Well, if he does that again this year, then
Hey, yeah, I'll take it. Speaking of sacks, quarterbacks, I think we'll finish on that. I've felt all offseason that it was going to be Cousins, Mannion, and Browning. And it seemed like at OTAs and mini camps, like that Sloter, like there were days that he didn't even get a chance to work with anyone. He was like holding the clipboard. Philosophically, like I think the team has always liked having a starter, then a reliable but boring and not very good backup, but like a veteran guy like Sean Hill, for example, and then a young prospect with a big arm that they can work with, like Heineke. Sloter being that guy for a while. But I've heard some good things about Browning, the rookie that they brought in. He had a couple really nice deep passes in stride, one for a touchdown. I think I wrote down to who, not that it really matters. It was with... it was Treadwell. Ugh. And it sounds like, I've heard conflicting things about Manny, and I heard that he had a bad start. He was kind of not in the same page as some of the receivers, which is not that surprising. He's new, and there's a lot of young guys, especially if he's working with the twos or threes. But that he really has been picking things up quickly, and yesterday he had a really great day. I haven't heard anything about Sloter, to be honest. That's true.
Are new, so they're gonna take big long looks at them and they've got him. They know what they have in the Norman, and he's got his work cut out for him. We're gonna find that what happened with the OTAs continues
Definitely.
Definitely the point. So what are you going to do?
The only thing I've heard about him is that he's part of that holding battle. And maybe that'll help him if he's a capable holder. But there are a lot of question marks there. It'll be fun to see. I do feel that. I mean, granted, this was before the draft, so they didn't know who they were going to get or if they were going to get anyone of note at the position. But giving any money this offseason, I think, was telling in that they had limited money to spend, and bringing in Manny, and I think, even though I think it's like $100,000 to cut him, is something that I think they felt they had to do, and so I think that's telling as well. But we have a lot of camp left. Sounds like a lot of us are going to be at the night scrimmage on Saturday. A few of the guys have tickets for that. I am hoping to be able to go, but I have some other commitments I have to deal with. Otherwise, we will just be covering camp as we have been. If you are more of a Purple PTSD person than a Vikings Territory position, I will implore you to check out Vikings Territory, and also follow Sean Borman on Twitter, because he's been almost omnipresent, retweeting everything. He's like a hub for camp, and so he's been giving us a lot of tidbits and highlights. It's almost like being at camp. It's amazing. Outside of that, we do have some new stuff we're doing that we weren't doing as of the last show. Mainly, Deshaun Vaughn is doing a lot of video game stuff. We're going to be bringing a new thing called a Madden Monday, where we all play Madden against each other, against people that read or listen to our stuff. Deshaun Vaughn actually is doing a giveaway, 2 free copies of Madden, and I'm matching him on one of those. So Vikings Territory, also on Twitter, is going to be giving away 1 copy of Madden. So follow us on Twitter. Go to Deshaun Vaughn. I think his Twitter is at Vikings Fans, plural, 16. So at Vikings Fans 16, and you'll see the contest details there. Otherwise, like I said, make sure that you check out the site for the ticket club promotion, because a few of our guys bought 4 tickets and ended up saving $200 from that deal. And it lasts all year, and it extends to everything and everyone around the country. Deshaun lives in Maryland, which apparently is a rat-infested something and the other, according to the highest office in the land. Great. But he got tickets he's going to drive up to the Giants game, and so he saved $200 on those 4 tickets just based on fees. And the fees are usually 20% per ticket, so you get 5 tickets at $100. That's like paying for a 6th ticket, and there's no fees and no obligation to renew after the year, even though it's only a $10 fee. But you're saving $50 off the top on that premium membership, so I definitely would suggest people do it. It's a great, really cool thing. But yeah, this has been Morning Joe's. We will be back next week. We'll be doing a lot of keep an eye on the site, especially as Saturday gets close. If you're not going to be able to make it to the night scrimmage, we'll be doing some live streaming, some shows, sharing as much access as the team allows. So we're excited to be back, and thanks everyone for hanging in there these last couple weeks. And we'll talk to you next week. Skol!